Good morning, Boquete. Good morning, David. Good morning, Bolivar, a fantastic engineer here at the studio in Boquete, and Veronica. I'm pretty sure I got that name right. I don't know why I have so much trouble with that, because I know Veronica, Valerie, and Victoria, and I get them all messed up. You're listening to BoqueteNOW Talk Radio on Radio Cherokee 103.3 FM, sponsored by Big Daddy's Grill and the ACCB. Who has a show every last Friday of the month, by the way, is ACCB month. We always have someone on from them, and it's always a great show. Today, we have a very special guest in the studio, Celeste Mendelson. And if you don't know who she is, you're about to. Rather than sit here and try to explain to what she does, we're just going to say hello, Celeste. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you, Al. I'm grateful to be here.
And I know we had some scheduling problems. You were supposed to be on 2 weeks ago, then last week, but we finally got our act together here, and I'm really looking forward to today's show. You are a yoga instructor.
I'm a yoga therapist.
See, this is why I need to let you do this. So Tell us a little about what you do.
Okay, thanks, I will. All right, so yoga therapy is a little different. It requires a little bit more education. Mm-hmm. And I specialize. I am not working so much, although I do work with people physically. My focus is on CPTSD, which is complex PTSD, which typically originates in childhood, but doesn't have to. It's repetitive trauma. And you may be wondering what a class of 30 people with one instructor doing all these complicated poses and back bends and handstands and all of that has to do with trauma, of all things. And I'll tell you probably very little, because I don't use yoga in that way.
Right. Okay.
What I do does involve movement, but the purpose isn't you got to look like this and you got to do it like that. It's really about becoming more in touch with your physical self. Because one of the things that happens in trauma is that people detach from their physical bodies. They're not present here anymore, so they really don't know how they feel physically. And that's a big part of it, because sometimes there's violence involved in complex trauma. Frequently, that's true with children or with adults.
Sure.
And it's not safe to physically be present, so they're not. You wouldn't necessarily think, oh, well, I cannot be present, but it's actually quite possible. And when that happens, and it happens consistently, people become completely detached from their physical selves, and they don't really understand where their body is in space. They may not be able to translate physical feelings effectively and accurately. And so that's a part of what I do. And the other part of it is, of course, breath, which is huge. Trauma survivors tend not to breathe, and it doesn't matter whether that's somebody who was in the war in Afghanistan or whether it was somebody who lived with alcoholism as a child. The tendency is that we hold our breath or we breathe very shallowly, and it's a fear response. It comes from the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system, and it's that I'm holding my breath because I'm afraid if I breathe you'll hear me. Or you'll know that I'm here.
That's pretty deep right there. Yeah. I wonder if that has any connection to sleep apnea.
It totally does. As a matter of fact.
See, yes. I'm glad I brought that up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
It can. Sleep issues are a big thing for trauma survivors. Insomnia is a pretty standard complaint for people who have CPTSD. And there are a lot of pieces to that puzzle. It's not like you can say, well, okay, this is the thing.
Sure, yeah.
But breath is a big part of it, and people who can't take a full deep breath because they've compressed their belly so tight against their sternum that or their rib cage, it's like right. Because your diaphragm has to move in order to breathe. Well, yeah. And if you're holding your belly in, if you're sucking in your gut, soldier, okay, so that's true. Like, again, PTSD from the military, that's a thing. Or you're a woman walking around going, I want to look skinny. Or you're a trauma survivor, or all of the above. you're not getting a full breath because your diaphragm can't move.
Yeah.
And if your diaphragm can't move, you're not getting a good inhale or exhale. And so you're breathing about 1/3 of your lungs as opposed to the whole thing.
And that's fascinating because I think a lot of people don't really understand the importance of just the simple act of taking a deep breath. And I've had a lot of guests on the show that deal with either trauma. I've had yoga instructors. I've had all kinds of people on the show over the last couple of years that deal with your body, the body. And the one common thing that goes through all of this is breathing. Take a deep breath, ground yourself, center yourself, however it's presented. That seems to be something that is paramount to everything.
It totally is. It totally is. People who can't breathe well can't think well. I mean, your brain requires oxygen.
Sure.
And if you're not getting it, is it surprising that you're anxious? Well, you may have anxiety from events and PTSD and whatever, but the bottom line is, if you're not breathing, that anxiety gets worse. Because your brain is going, hello, I need oxygen. Hello, I need oxygen. It's trying to tell you something. And you're not listening because you don't know how. You're disconnected.
And the shallow breathing, that's I hadn't ever put that together because obviously, I haven't had anyone like you on the show yet who has put that together. But about 10, 15 years ago, I'd gone in, I have Parkinson's disease. So I'd gone in to have some tests done. And the doctor says to me, you need to go to have the sleep test. I said, okay, I'll go have a sleep test. He said, how have you been sleeping? I said, well, I really haven't been because between all that symptoms and everything. So I went over and they hooked me up with, how the test goes. You got wires everywhere. And the first thought was, how in the world am I going to be able to sleep with all like this? Anyway, eventually I did fall asleep. And what they told me was surprising. They said in an hour, I had anywhere between 180 and 200 incidences of my breath being abnormal and that I breathe extremely shallow.
Yeah.
And they gave me the machine to take home, which I can't use. I'm one of the 20% of people. I can't use it. No, I can't sleep with it.
Oh, no.
It just, I think alien, right? The thing on your head.
Yeah.
And I've tried all the different things, but that's a whole other show. But I never thought, and we talked earlier, before the show, and I want to get to some of that because it's absolutely fascinating. But I am personally not aware of any trauma that I had when I was a child. But yet, I do have breathing issues.
It doesn't mean that you had trauma. It doesn't necessarily.
Because there are people out there, they're going to think,
No. People can have sleep apnea problems and not have a trauma history.
So it'd just be a physiological thing.
Right. Yeah. But is it something that comes along with trauma frequently? Yes, because of that thing that we were talking about. It's like they don't breathe well. And even when they are asleep, they may still have that tension in their gut, right? That keeps them in that red alert place of, things can happen. Even if I'm sleeping.
It's like a constant state of alert.
It is a constant state of red alert.
Even when you're sleeping.
It is a constant state of red alert. Sometimes it's even when you're sleeping. Frequently, I think. And it's part of the sleep problems, right? How can you sleep when you're on red alert?
Sure, yeah.
When you're waiting for, somebody to come home drunk and start yelling or,
the anticipation.
If that was your history as a child, sleep is hard.
Wow.
Sleep is hard.
And you had mentioned just right before the show started about these things being passed on. And you told a fascinating story about rats.
You want me to tell you that story
I would
again?
love for you to tell everyone listening because I sat here when you told me that and that actually kind of blew my mind. So yes, please tell the rat story.
Tell the rat story. Okay, so what I'm going to tell you about the rat story is I cannot remember the name of the study, which is a bummer because that would be really helpful. You could look it up and go, that's what she was talking about. But the story of the study goes like this. The scientists took a group of rats and they put them in a cage with a metal bottom that had electrodes attached to it. So they had the ability to electrify the bottom of the cage. They would ring a bell and then they would send the electricity through the bottom of the cage and shock the rats. over time, what happened is the rats are not stupid, right? They learned if that bell rings, we're going to get a shock.
Yep.
And they knew that. And because they knew that, even before they ever got shocked, even when they stopped shocking them, if the bell rang, they went into, they had the electrodes attached and whatever. They were monitoring their heart rates and their blood pressure and all the rest of it. They would become dysregulated because they knew it was coming because they heard the bell. Then they took those rats, they had babies, they bred them, and they took the babies and they put them in the cage. And they rang the bell. They didn't shock the babies. But here's the weird part of the story. The babies were dysregulated just like their parents were, even though they had never experienced the shock. The ringing of that bell was the signal that there was something bad going to happen, and they knew it. And they bred them for 7 generations. And through those 7 generations, that held true. At the 8th, the cycle broke. What that tells us is that generational trauma, which is something you may or may not have heard before, you may think is, oh, that's woo-woo, that's like, no, that can't happen. It's real, and they proved it.
Yeah, and I would imagine that, if you're dealing with someone who is a victim of that, that's got to be a very, very difficult wall to break through, a very difficult barrier to break through, dealing with someone who's dealing with trauma they don't even know they have. Exactly.
So, not to harsh your buzz here, but you had parents that grew up in the Depression.
Yeah.
Is it possible that there's generational trauma in your background? Yeah, it's possible.
I would, because I don't know what happened 5, 6, 7, on my dad's side of the family. Right,
exactly.
So yeah.
So we don't know necessarily what happened, but we do know what we can do today. And the first thing I'm going to tell everybody here is please take a deep breath. You can test for yourself. Take your hands and put one on your chest and one on your belly.
I'm going to do this. Okay, ready?
You're going to do this with me?
I'll be your guinea pig.
Okay, be my guinea pig.
Okay.
One on your chest and one on your belly.
Got it.
Okay, and then just take a couple of breaths in and out. And feel yourself breathing in and feel yourself breathing out. Notice the sensation of breath. What you feel in your hands, what you feel in your chest and your belly.
All right.
And then answer a question, just right off the top of your head. Where do you feel the most movement in your hands? In your belly or your chest?
Definitely in my belly.
Okay, well, good for you. Maybe you didn't have too much trauma when you were a kid. Frequently, trauma survivors will breathe only in their chest, or very little at least.
And why is that? Why is that?
Because they're contracting their stomach, because it's that fear response,
right.
that, and they're like fight or flight freeze motion.
Like
they're
bracing for something. I know when I'm bracing for, like, when I walk in the house and my dogs are running right towards me. I'm like, oh,
exactly. Like that. So
or my wife when I come home,
Oh, you're in trouble. Maybe there could be trauma there. I'm kidding. So the thing is that trauma survivors frequently, you will hear them say, if they do this test, if you guys out there do this test and you find that you're breathing more into your chest than you are into your belly, you'll know something, right? Because we tend to, and I'll say we because, I came to this work honestly. I am a trauma survivor. So that being the case, I was a chest breather. Oh. And I found that out, big surprise, in a yoga class, because I had an instructor that was going to do a breath practice.
Sure, yeah.
And said, I want you to do this thing.
Yeah.
And just notice where your breath is mostly. And I was mostly a chest breather. And she said, you're a reverse breather. And I went, huh?
What?
And I was like, what? And so I learned firsthand. Is it fixable? Absolutely.